Hello and welcome back, everybody. Today's video, we're going to be talking a little bit about Patrick Williams and kind of how he's regressed over his career after being the fourth overall pick by the Chicago Bulls a few years back. And we're going to talk about how he's kind of had an impact on the lineup and what it's done for his career and how he's impacted the Chicago Bulls. But we'll get right into that right after this. Alright guys, welcome back. Today's video, as I talked about, is going to be about Patrick Williams. You know, when we drafted him, I was very excited. You know, he was a lengthy, young forward who was very versatile, who had a lot of upside and had a lot of potential to be something good for the future. I wouldn't say a star potential player, but a player that could really have an impact and be a very good role player for the Chicago Bulls. Now, a few years later down the line, looking at that thought process from me, you know, it didn't really play out how I thought it was going to. You know, he really hasn't lived up to the potential that he could be, or what the organization saw him as, or what the organization saw him that he could have, and it's been quite the downfall for Patrick Williams. It hasn't been very exciting to watch either when watching and tuning into the games. Through the month of January this year of 2026, he's only averaged about 6 points a game, 3 rebounds, and 1 assist, shooting 37% from 3. Not horrific. Definitely could be better, but definitely not horrific. But the stat that needs to be talked about a little bit, just for the month of January, he's shooting 35% from the field. And on a year, he's only shooting 37% from the field. And that number is very, very bad. And I feel like it's going to be very hard to get off of Patrick Williams' contract. You know, it's quite a large contract. It's not too large, but it's definitely going to be hard to get off his contract, especially with how he's been playing and the money that is attached to him. People are going to look at that and be kind of questioning why, like, what they could give back for a player of his caliber, especially with how bad he's playing. You know, over his career, he's only averaged 9 points, about 4 rebounds, and about assists and a half. He's shooting, for his career, 39% from 3, which is pretty good. It's a solid number, and 44% from the field. You know, that number is questionable as well, but I feel Patrick Williams has kind of lost his momentum and his drive to play, or not to play basketball, but, you know, his minutes have been very up and down. You know, the month of January, has averaged 16 minutes a game. Through December, 16 minutes as well. In November, 20 minutes. October, 22. So his numbers have gone down for minutes played. And I'm sure that's had an effect on him, because obviously when you're a professional player and you're seeing your coach give other guys minutes and stuff like that, you know, you're a former first-round pick, number 4 overall, to be fair. You know, he had a lot of upside. We talked about that a little bit. And he had a lot of potential. You know, I thought he was going to be something special, like a special role player, something that could really help and bring something to Chicago. And I feel like what I thought Patrick Williams would be is what Modest Buzelis is for the Chicago Bulls, which I'm not mad at. You know, we had to wait, 6 years, 5 years for Modest. But, you know, now that we're starting to get there and see a little growth, you know, it's nice to see. But for this organization to continue to keep Patrick Williams and re-sign him on the contract that they did is kind of crazy to think about, especially with the play he's been playing at, as we talked about. I don't know what team could possibly take Patrick Williams, but he definitely has to go one of these days, because his production has not been very good. You know, he's been out the past 2 games with an injury. I don't think it's anything too serious, but looking at all the numbers and the things he's done over the years, his play has been absolutely pitiful, to be honest. And it's something you hate to see. You know, I had a lot of faith when he was coming into the league. You know, he looked like he was going to be something pretty promising. And, you know, I got my hopes up. And after a while, you know, I had faith in him at the start of the season. You know, he started the season really, really good. he was looking like he was going to be, like, he was only averaging 9 points per game in October. He's shooting 53% from the field and 50% from three. He wasn't taking too many shots, but he was shooting the ball pretty efficiently. And it was something that, I was like, okay, maybe Patrick Williams is really starting to pick it up and see his potential. But he doesn't play aggressive enough when he is on the court and playing for the Chicago Bulls. I feel that he doesn't really realize how big he is and the size that he has, that he can play bully ball in the paint and do a lot of different things in the paint. He likes to stand in the corner or kind of just stand around on the court. He moves around on the court but doesn't move like crazy. And I think that's something that I've definitely noticed over the past few years when watching him play basketball. I feel like he doesn't really have a high motor. Early on in his career, he did. He had a higher motor, and I think that once Billy Donovan started to give him less and less minutes, that kind of affected him and his mental game. So we'll kind of see how this all plays out and how, what the future holds for Patrick Williams. But that's going to be all for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next episode.